Hi there, Lindee Goodall here from Lindee Embroidery. Today I want to show you this amazing Nutcracker applique design that I finished. Now he is big and you're going to have a large hoop for this project. So yes, you're going to need a really large hoop, and he's still 3 hoopings. Now don't be scared when I say 3 hoopings, because I've factored in some overlap here. So if you aren't totally perfect, it'll still come out just fine. Now, those of us that have these large hoops, we want a really wowy design to really show off our machine. And this is the design that can do that. He has 36 appliques in him. He is finished. The Nutcracker himself is 8 1/4 inches wide and 30 inches tall. So he's a big dude. And the finished project itself is 18 1/2 inches wide and 42 inches tall. It does come with full instructions. I don't tell you how to put the binding on, but there are plenty of videos on how to do binding, and you may want to finish it differently than I did. I used a pre-quilted backing so that I have nice stable fabric to work on. And then I used a variety of textured fabrics. I have a fluffy, fuzzy thing for his plume. I have vinyl on his hat and his boots. I have a metallic fiber here, metallic fabric here on the horn. I've used metallic threads and regular threads, and this is just one of those wonderful pieces that you can really showcase different fabrics. So I can tell you that I spent more time picking fabrics than it did to take to sew it. Now this project was not a weekend project. I started the idea for this over 3 years ago, and what it did was I had this idea to do some really major Nutcracker piece, and I wanted a banner thing. And I just started collecting ideas. But it was about 2 months ago that I actually seriously started working on it. And he's really a wow feature. So in the rest of this video, you'll see me making the beta version of this. So I'm not even working with a file that's been tested yet. So this is kind of gutsy to beta test right on camera. You won't see me do the whole thing start to finish, because once you know how to put appliques down and once you know how to hoop, it's just more and more of the same. And we would have been here for hours, even though I speed through the sewing process. And the sewing actually took me 4 days, and that was because one full day we ended up going up to Phoenix to get the machine fixed. So thank you, my queens, for fixing my machine so quickly and getting me back on track. So basically, once you get your pieces all cut and you start sewing, it's pretty relaxing. You're going to have to spend time at your machine because you're going to interact a lot to place these appliques. And these are all require pre-cuts. I did not do a pre-cut up here. It is set up for a pre-cut, but I show you how to back up and use it for pre-cut even if the design is not set up for pre-cut. So that's a little tip there. So overall, this is an amazing piece, and you'll definitely want one for your holiday decorations. So let's jump right in and learn how to make this. So let's see what you're going to need to start with. You're going to start by doing a lot of printing. So I've printed out each one of my hoopings and taped them together so that I have a full-size template. And this is a large hoop. So you're going to need a 240 by 360 hoop. And what's going to happen is we're going to sew one hooping, and then the middle hooping, and then the top hooping. So the next thing I did was to make a mock-up of the finished design. If we turn him sideways, we can see the whole thing. I'll turn him around this way. And this is what you're going to use to pick your fabrics, because you really need to pick your fabrics first. This has 35 appliques. The entire design is 30 inches tall by 8 1/2 inches wide. So I use this to help me pick my fabrics. You do not have to use these colors. In fact, I use green instead of this blue. I originally wanted to use blue, but when I was looking for other fabrics, I found some border fabrics that just didn't go well with blues. So you should probably start by picking your base fabric and your border fabric. So I'm going to use one of these for my border fabric, and probably one of these for binding. And for my base fabric, I use this beige quilted fabric. Now I wanted to do white, but the white really didn't look good with this color here. So I went with the beige. And I'm using a fairly large piece here. And the reason I'm using a large piece is because at this point, I have not yet made this project. And I don't know how I'm going to finish it. So I chose this quilted fabric for my finished back. And the reason I chose this is because this is a pretty big project. And I thought I would like to quilt around it, but I couldn't figure out how I could quilt in the hoop and match up my quilting. So I just went with quilted fabric. Also, because it's fabric on both sides, it's going to be more stable. So it's going to be a nice stable background for doing all these hoopings and all this stitching. Now the appliques do save us a lot of stitches. So this should go pretty well with my other fabrics. Now what I'm going to do is, because this is quilted and it's thicker, rather than to piece a border onto the outside edge, I'm going to piece the border right onto this fabric so that it's the same thickness all the way around. So once I have that, then I can start picking my fabrics for my appliques. You're going to need to print out all your applique templates. And I've color-coded mine with some preliminary colors. The ones that will come with your design set will probably look different than this. I've just taken the ones that I can export from my software, imported into Adobe Illustrator, and then color-coded it to help me with my placements. And I've grouped them how I want to cut them. Can you cut these on a cutter? You most certainly can. I cut them by hand. So once you've cut all your templates, what I've done is I've printed them on a fusible template paper. Now normally I like to use a heat fusible paper, like Sulky Tear Easy is one I use a lot. You can also use freezer wrap. Freezer wrap doesn't adhere as well as a heat fusible tearaway. Now because I have a lot of fabrics here that I can't fuse onto, like this velvet, for this project I used this Floriani template tearaway. And it says printable, pressure sensitive. And this is, it's a printable, ultralight, sticky tearaway. Some of the stickiness stuck really, really well. So I might have some trouble peeling this off of my templates. I've never used this before. For the back, I'm using Steam-A-Seam 2. And I can't really press it on there like I like to, so we'll see if that's going to work okay. So some of this is an experiment. Now, once you've got all your colors picked, you can see how I've just stuck those templates right on there. And the back is all prepared. I will need to cut these out. So the next prep step is to get all your colors. And I printed out my color worksheets. And this design works from the bottom up. So this will be design number 1, number 2, and number 3. We don't need to see these at actual size. What I'm concerned about here are the color sequences. Now you notice that we have a lot of color repeats. Design number 1 has 40 color changes, so it has 41 colors. Actually only has 13 colors. And when you get down to it, it really has fewer than that, because this pink and purple here, this is a placement line, this is a tack down, placement, tack down, placement, tack down, placement, tack down, and then the cover stitch. So I'm going to sew all of these in whatever I use for the cover stitch. Now in this particular case, the cover stitch color is military gold, but I'm going to replace that with metallic gold. And I won't sew all of these in metallic gold. I'll use a regular polyester embroidery thread for that. So I've marked up my worksheet so I know, okay, I want metallic gold here, but I want regular gold here. And I've marked them up so I know in this grouping I can just use green. This grouping I can use this bark color. And so that helps me figure that out. Now, how do you figure that out? You open the design in your software and you watch it play in slow motion. So you print this out, open the design in your software, watch it sew in slow motion on your computer. And I've done that for each one of my worksheets. So I have everything lined up and I've picked all my colors. So I just have all my colors in this box. Now, I do have a multi-needle machine, it has 15 needles. So I could sew each one of these in one hooping and just rethread the machine. But what I found is when I'm doing these multi-hooping things, and particularly ones that have a lot of applique stops, where I'd have to program in all of these colors correctly, it's just actually easier to do it on my single needle machine. Plus I have a Brother Dream machine here and has some special alignment features, and maybe I'll actually figure out how to use those things. So let's go back to the full-size templates. These are the full-size templates. Hooping 1, hooping 2, and hooping 3. And you'll notice that they have some crosses on here. So this one has some red ones. This one has red ones and green ones. This one only has green ones. And you can see them down here. So the way this works is I'll hoop my first hooping. I'll sew all of my design, and then I'll sew these red X's. These are registration marks. Then what I'll do is I'll hoop for my next hooping, and I'm going to be floating this project. Normally I'm not a fan of floating, but when you have to do these precise alignments, it can be very helpful. Now another thing I've done with these alignment marks is they are not at the edge of my hoop. They are somewhat in. And that's so that I can move my hoop a little bit to get them lined up. So when I come to this one, I'll hoop my stabilizer. It's going to be a sticky tearaway. And I will sew these green marks, which sew first, right onto my stabilizer. Then with my hoop, I'll take this piece. We'll pretend like this is my ready embroidered piece that I've already done. And I'm going to line up those red marks with the green marks. And once I get that lined up and stuck down, then I will smooth out the rest of my fabric and I will sew this part. The red marks sew at the end. And so now I have a design that looks like this. So that's what I have on my fabric now. Then I'll hoop my third hooping. I'll sew my green marks right on the stabilizer. Then I'll line up my fabric that's already been stitched, stick it down, and sew the final hooping. So you've got a lot of work to do before you ever get to your first stitches in your first placement. So to prepare your fabric, this is 1.5 yards long and 22 inches wide. So basically what I did was I just took 1.5 yards of fabric and I cut it right up the middle. So I have 2 pieces. So I have 2 chances to get this right. And what I've done is, on what I've decided is the front side, and I do recommend that you look at your fabric carefully because I had to take this fabric back because it had bad places in the stitching. If it had been underneath the Nutcracker, no problem, but it was out here where it'd be visible. So I've marked the center of my fabric. So center, center. And then what I did was I took my center design and I lined up the center with that center. And then I took this piece, lined it up this way, and marked the center. So this center is right here with this pin. And I'll use that to mark my first hooping. So I have a little extra space. I have quite a bit of fudge factor around here. I don't know what my finished size is going to be yet because I haven't worked that out. But by the time you get the project, you'll have accurate dimensions, I promise. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hoop my stabilizer and get my fabric positioned straight. And what I'm trying to do is to keep all my diamond quilting straight, because I don't want it kind of whomper jaw. So at this point, I'm ready to hoop and start at the machine. So I'm now ready to sew hooping number 1. I've got my worksheet all marked up with my colors. I've got my colors all picked. I have all my pieces cut out. And let me tell you about my experience with this stuff. Do not use it. If you're putting it on regular fabric, you'll never get it peeled off. And if your fabric is stretchy at all, it's going to distort it when you take it off. If you're putting it on something smooth, like this is vinyl, it comes off, but it leaves all the sticky behind, which which is just nasty. So that stuff doesn't work. Normally what I would use would be a fusible product, a fusible tearaway, but a lot of these products can't be ironed. They have a low temperature setting, or you can't iron them at all. So what I did instead was I printed all of my templates on just regular paper, and I used KK2000. Now when you use this, you have to spray some, put your template on there, cut it out right away. You have to cut accurately. If you spray a bunch of pieces and you lay out all your pieces and then you start cutting, this will have dissipated enough that your template will slip. If your template slips, it's not going to fit the shape in the hoop. So that's the important thing. You've got to get a good fit. So this is real easy to peel off. So I'm just going to, when I'm ready to sew that, I'm just going to peel it off. I did not use the KK on this. What I used on this was a glue stick. And so that held it in place while I could cut it. And if there's any sticky left on there, and I don't really feel any, I could just wipe it off with a damp sponge. This is not going to do well on something that is not permeable. So you don't want to put this on a vinyl or plastic or leather or anything like that. It works fine on fabric. So now I'm ready to hoop my fabric and get in the machine. And what I chose to use was, this is a Floriani product. I don't know what it's called, but it's like Hydro Stick. So I normally use Hydro Stick, but my roll wasn't big enough to hoop. And what it is it's a tearaway with a water-soluble adhesive on it. So you hoop this, you wipe it down with a damp sponge or a damp cloth, then you stick your fabric to it. And when it dries, it's adhered. And to get it off, you just kind of wet it and peel it off again. My hoop is already in the machine, and I have basted the first layer. So it's already positioned. We're ready to go. You'll see it in a moment when we switch to the machine. Let's see, is there anything else I need to say before we switch to the machine? So I'm going to get you started at the machine, show you the first couple colors and how to place the templates. Then you're not going to see the whole thing sew. If we see the whole thing sew, we will be here for 2 days doing this. So once I get the first hooping done, I'll take it out and I'll show you how I hoop for the second hooping. And that's the important thing, is knowing how to get the hoopings together, because once you've stitched applique, it's just the same. We're just doing the repeated steps. Now, could I have combined some of these to make them more efficient? I could have, but I created this design in Hatch. If I combine the appliques, then I lose my template shapes. So I chose to keep it as separate. And if you want to color sort, you can go ahead. Now, one other question I'm sure you're going to have is, what if I don't have a really big hoop? Because remember I said I was using a 240 by 360 hoop. Well, I don't know what you're going to do. I'm not sure that I'm going to make a smaller version of this. It'd just be a lot of work. Some of the appliques would just be too small. Now, if you only have a 5 by 7 hoop, some of these pieces are just not going to work. So you'd have to rehoop a lot of different times. And there is software that will split it up. You do not want to split an object across an applique. You want to make sure the whole applique is in one hooping. Some of these appliques are going to be too big for a 5 by 7 hoop. I don't know about other hoops. I just haven't tried it. You know, those of us that have these really large hoops, we want something special to really show off that hoop. And this is a project that can do that. And if you don't have one of those machines, well, maybe it's time to upgrade. I'm ready to sew now. I've got my first color in the machine, and we'll move over there and we'll start sewing. So I have my design loaded. I've already added the basting stitch, and I'm ready to sew color number 1. So this is the side of the drum, and I'm just going to place my fabric right inside those lines. And if you cut accurately and you place accurately, you're going to have a beautiful applique finish. Now, could you trim in place? Well, you can, but this design is not set up for that. This is set up for pre-cuts. And at this point, what I want to do is I want to look to see if there are any pokies sticking out that I need to trim off. Because sometimes as you're stitching around, the needle will rub off a thread along the edge. And I don't have that. So I'll peel off my label. This is the left side. Peel off my backing paper. You can see my fusible web there. I will not be fusing this. I'm just using this to give the fabric some body as I cut it and to hold it in place. Make sure you get it placed precisely. So now I'm ready for color number 9. And I have metallic gold down for this, and I'm not sure that I want to do metallic gold on this. This might be too much because I do have shiny fabric there. And I do have 2 metallic golds I could use. I think this one's prettier, but I think I'm just going to go with the regular gold. I've got hooping number 1 sewn. I have my registration marks that were sewn at the end of this hooping. I've already moved this from the hoop and taken the stabilizer off. Now when you take your stabilizer off, you want to make sure that you don't rip out your registration marks when you're in the process. So I just cut around those. Once again, I'm using the Floriani Wet and Stick. Now this has a grid. It's not going to show on my design because this is quilted fabric. So if you're using something that this might show through, and it can, you don't want to use this kind of gridded stuff. Another product you can use, like I mentioned before, is Hydro Stick. So now I'm ready to sew my second hooping, and I've already hooped my stabilizer. I've already sewn my registration marks. So my design is already loaded into my machine, and I've added a basting box. Now, when you add a basting box, it goes first. So I had to advance to color number 2 to sew just these basting marks. So when I put this back in the machine, I'm going to back up 1 color so that I can add my basting box. So now the trick is to line up these registration marks with this. And right now this is dry. I did not stitch these on here with this dampened. So I'm ready to dampen it down. I'm just using a damp cloth. And let me get a little bit more prepared here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick some pins through those X's. I just want to stick it through the center. And I'm going to use that to help me line up to the marks. Now, yes, I do have a machine that has magical alignment capabilities, but not everybody has one of those machines, so I'm going to show you the kind of manual method for doing this. So I'm going to get it semi-lined up. And then I'm going to dampen my thing down. I'm just kind of scrubbing it with this damp towel, and that activates the glue, the adhesive. And now I want to line this up, and my head might get in the way so that I can really see what I'm doing here. Now on fabrics that are kind of see-through, I like to do this on top of a light box, because then you can just kind of see the X's through the fabric. And obviously we can't do that with this quilted fabric. And you do want to take your time with this and make sure that you have it perfectly aligned. Because if it's not perfectly aligned, guess what? Your stitching won't be perfectly aligned. So then I'm just going to smooth it in place, make sure that it's stuck down to the stabilizer. Then I'll put it in the machine and I'll do my basting box. Now before I do that, I want to make sure that I have all of my pieces set out. So these are all the appliques that are going to be sewn in this hooping. And I've got them all laid out here. They're all arranged in approximately the same position that they'll be in my hoop. So now that we're ready, I'll just put this in my machine and I'm ready to stitch. So I've got my hoop back in my machine and I need to go back to the beginning of my design. And I've already done that. And this way I can do my basting stitch. I'm going to just advance one stitch to get to the first stitch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch around, but when I get down to the boots, I'm actually going to skip over those because those are vinyl and I don't want any extra needle holes in there. And now I'm just going to advance a couple stitches. And of course it helps when the camera is not in front of your machine. Put the presser foot down again and continue stitching. Now color number 2 is my registration marks. So I want to skip that. Now remember, the appliques have 3 color stops. I'm sewing them all in the same color. This is sort of a velvety material, so I'm not going to be able to use my applique tagging iron, but it still has the fusible web on the back. And once again, that's Steam-A-Seam 2, which is a double sticky, so it's holding it in place while I stitch. So the first lower jacket piece is sewn, and you'll notice that there are some gaps here where there's no satin stitching. And that's because this is going to be overlaid with another applique. So don't worry if your satin stitching does not go all the way around. You can see that there's no satin stitching up here, and that's because this is going to get covered up. So we're going to keep on stitching, and I'll come back and show you as this is just wrapping up. So I've got my third position hooped, and what I like to do is go around and check those registration marks again. So I'm on the last registration mark, and if I just drop the needle, you can see, maybe you can't see, we'll see if we can zoom in. It's right in the center of my X. And if it's right in the center of my X on all 4 of those, then I know that I'm registered. And remember, I have to go back because it's now in color 2. So now I'm back at the beginning of my design. I'll advance to color number 1. And now I'm ready to sew my basting box. And the rest is just the same. We'll sew the basting box. I'll skip color number 2 like I did on the last hooping. And then I'll sew the rest of the design. Now this one only has 3 appliques, so it's not going to take as long as some of our other ones. And when I get to the plume, I'm not going to pre-cut that one because it's a big fluffy thing, and we will trim in the hoop. So it's using what I call the blob method, which is more correctly known as the trim in place method. And it's because it's so fluffy and hairy and I just can't put a template on there to cut it out. And if I remember, I'll stop the machine and I'll show you what I'm doing. But otherwise, this is all just standard applique. The tricky part is in the hooping process. And you're just going to take your time and hoop it. Of course, the other tricky part is making sure all your appliques are cut accurately. You want to cut them very, very precisely, because the cleaner you cut them, the cleaner your result will be. So I'm going to cut the video for now, and we'll come back later on. The appliques in this design are set up for pre-cuts, and I have a fuzzy, fluffy fabric here, and it's not going to do well for a pre-cut. So I've sewn my placement line. I'm going to lay my fabric over that. And I'm also going to place some water-soluble film over that. And I'm going to back up one color change because I need to sew that placement line one more time again. Because this is not set up for a trim in place, the next step that would normally sew would be a zigzag. And that's too hard to trim up next to. So I'm going to repeat the placement guide, which will sew a running stitch right on top of where we had before. Now I need to trim around this right up next to that stitching line, but not going through the stitching line. And I'm probably going to have to do this off camera because I don't think I can do it in my machine. But the scissors I like for that are something like this. So you're just going to trim around it, and I really can't get that close to it with it in the machine, but you want to trim all the way around, and then we'll come back and put it back in the machine and finish the design. So here you can see that I have the plume all trimmed. I'm ready to sew the last two colors, which will be the tack down and the finishing satin stitch. And then we're done. Okay, are you ready to see our finished Nutcracker? Here he is. You can see I already have my borders on. I'll talk about those in a minute. And here we go. Here's the top of him. So I'm going to roll him back a bit. I have a fluffy plume up here. I have vinyl on his hat. I have some gold metallic braid on his hat, some regular gold thread, a pattern across his ribbon here, and all these beautiful textures and different fabrics. So after I got him all stitched, I used a ruler, and my quilt fabric here goes all the way out to the edge. So I didn't piece on this border and then add another batting or anything. So what I did was I took a ruler and I figured out where I wanted that to be, and I moved it out 1/4 inch, and then I drew a pencil line down there. And then I just took my fabric, laid it face down, used my 1/4 edge foot, and attached my sides. So on the back, I have a label, and I just put a decorative Christmas fabric on the back because the back of embroidery just doesn't look good. And I did a bias binding. So the instructions do not cover how to add a bias binding. And the total project finished is 18.5 inches wide by 42 inches tall. And I did add a sleeve on the back so that I can add a hanger. Even though I had this little skinny hanger, I could also hang it on something much wider. So if you don't know how to do bias binding and you don't know how to add a sleeve, there are plenty of videos on the internet. I didn't show you how to do that. So let me give you some tips. Allow plenty of time for this project. I spent more time gathering fabrics. I made several trips out to the fabric stores. I went through my stashes, and mostly my stashes include small fabrics that are mostly quilt weight cottons. So I ended up buying almost all of these fabrics. And I just bought a 1/4 yard of this and 1/4 yard of that. And I've got some vinyl. I have some, here's some quilt weight cotton. Here is a sort of suede finish fabric. I also used this suede finish fabric on his pants. And I've gotten some satiny fabrics here on his sleeves and cuffs and on the horn. I have metallic fabric here, another metallic fabric here, vinyl on his boots. And you can see how I have shiny fabrics and different textures. So take your time picking your fabrics. Now this is not an exceptionally high stitch count design for the size of this finished design. I mean, the finished design itself is about 8 1/4 inches wide by, I think, 30 inches tall. So if you were to stitch all of this with full embroidery stitches, you would be stitching forever. But you will have to interact with your machine a lot because you're going to have to place your applique fabrics down. So what I recommend is do it when you're feeling relaxed. And put on a good audiobook, which is what I did, and then just stitch. And it's quite relaxing. So if you have everything assembled and everything pre-cut and everything organized, it's much easier to do your sewing at that point. So when you're done, you'll have a project that's sure to be the envy of all your friends and family. The first one always takes a little more time, but after that you do get faster.